I'm delighted to be able to introduce Michael Boland to you. Michael is the Chief Park Officer at the historic Presidio, although I think, based on what he told me a while back, he may have actually officially retired. Is that true, Michael, or are you still on the job?
2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks to go? Okay.
Yep.
Well, he has been in that role for the past 23 years. And prior to that, he was the Director of Park Projects for the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, a position that he held for 8 years. He has degrees in architecture, a bachelor's degree in architecture, and not one, but 2 master's degrees, one in landscape architecture and one in city and regional planning. And all of those are from the UC Berkeley. And with all of those credentials, he was certainly, I'm sure, well poised to take on his responsibilities in both of those positions that he held these past 30-some years, being responsible for overseeing many large-scale transformations in recreational areas up in the Bay Area. And we are really, I think, fortunate to be able to hear from him firsthand the history of the Tunnel Tops project that he oversaw, and all of the visioning and implementation of that fascinating project. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michael, and thank you.
All right, Carol, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. And Lily, I'm still thinking about Big Stinky, so I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through this presentation without a couple of chuckles. I am really delighted to be here tonight to talk to you about the work that we've done in the Presidio of San Francisco. And, as Carol mentioned, the Presidio is a national park site located at the southern end of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. I think of us as the green bit at the southern end of the bridge. But it's a site that was included in the national park system because it has a very deep, very long history. It was the traditional homeland of the Yelamu, which are a tribe of the Ramaytush Ohlone people who occupied this part of California for thousands of years. And this is one of the earliest representations of the original Spanish garrison that was built in 1776 when the Spanish worked their way up from California and founded a fort, and of course began the colonization of Northern California. That began 235 years of military use of the site. And the Presidio at one point was the longest continuously used military site in the United States. Because of that long military history, the site was included in 1962, while it was still a military base. It was designated National Historic Landmark District. It has over 1,200 historic features, has almost 500 historic buildings, and an incredible number of historic landscapes and historic landscape features. So because of that, it became a National Historic Landmark while it was still an Army base. And interestingly enough, as is often the case, the Army also preserved the best remaining collection of native San Francisco, a pre-European contact San Francisco, and is something of a biodiversity hotspot. The site actually preserves 22 rare, endangered, and threatened plant species, and a total number of almost 400 different native plant species. So per acre, it's actually the greatest concentration of special status plant species of any national park in the United States. And most of it is a former Army base that was developed by the Army. So it's a pretty remarkable place. Because of that important history and rich ecology, in 1972, when the Golden Gate National Recreation Area was created, the Presidio was, though it was still an active military site, was included in the legislative boundary of the park. And it was included because it is the most urban part of the lands that would ultimately become the GGNRA, because it's surrounded on 2 sides by San Francisco. And it was conceived of at that time by the National Park Service as a kind of gateway, not only to the broader GGNRA, but also to national parks more generally in the United States. Now, in 1989, 2 very important things happened. First, in January, the Army announced that they were going to be leaving the Presidio, which no one ever believed the Army would leave the Presidio. So it came as a big shock to the local community. And then in October, during Game 1 of the World Series, of course, there was the Loma Prieta earthquake. And that resulted in damage all around the bay. One of the most dramatic pieces of that damage was the collapse of the cypress structure in the East Bay, which began a very large conversation about two things. The first was, what should the Presidio become, as a national park? What does it mean for a former Army base with over 800 buildings, with 6 million square feet of built space in the middle of a city? What does it mean for that to be a national park? How does it contribute to our ability to understand what it means to be an American and what our heritage is? And secondly, a second really important conversation began, which was, what do we do about all the elevated freeways around the bay? And Doyle Drive, which was the freeway approach to the Golden Gate Bridge that connected downtown San Francisco to the Golden Gate Bridge, was one of the priority projects because for years it had been rated as one of the most dangerous highways in California. It was actually a 2 out of 100 from a safety standpoint, and there were constant accidents on Doyle Drive. And so these two big conversations started in 1989, and they were moving along in tandem. And both conversations have an important role to play in our conversation about the Presidio Tunnel Top project. Now, once the Park Service got to work in analyzing the Presidio, what they discovered was that for decades, the Army had been underinvesting in the site, and that the site was really a terrible mess. And they did a financial analysis of the Presidio, and what they determined is that to turn the Presidio into, to restore the Presidio, to restore all the buildings, to restore the historic landscapes, that it would increase, adopting the site would increase the deferred maintenance backlog in the entire national park system by 50%. Because it was essentially a small town of about 10,000 people in the middle of a wilderness, in the middle of a city. So wildly expensive place to rehabilitate. As a result, in 1996, the US Congress created a new kind of partnership to steward the Presidio when it created the Presidio Trust. So the Presidio Trust is a new kind of federal agency created in the mid-90s as an example of reinventing government. The trust was given jurisdiction over 80% of the Presidio. The remaining 20% remained in the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. And both organizations were paired up with an incredible nonprofit organization, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, an organization that not only played an important role in creating the trust, but has played a really important role that I'll talk a little bit more along the way. So just one note here, everything that I'm talking about tonight is really an outgrowth of this partnership. So when I use the word we, it's not just those of us who work for the Presidio Trust, it's really staff from all three organizations working together to make all of these important transformative projects happen, including the tunnel tops. Presidio Trust is a very unique organization where, like other national park superintendencies, other national park sites, in that our primary purpose is to preserve the park's natural, cultural, scenic, and recreational resources. Because we're an urban national park, we have an added dimension to our mission, which is to bring national park experiences to communities and audiences that historically have not been well served by national parks, that historically have been underrepresented visitation to national parks. And the third thing, and this was really the kicker, is that unlike any other national park in the United States, we were given 15 years to become fully financially self-sufficient, or the land would have been sold and developed as another neighborhood in San Francisco. So as you can imagine, those of us who worked in the Presidio at that time, we were highly motivated to get to financial self-sufficiency. So our first job really was to save the place. And Congress really gave us only one way to do that, which was to take these buildings, many of which looked like this. On the left, you see one of the 1,500 housing units in the park. And on the right, you see one of 4 derelict hospital buildings that we inherited from the Army. To take these buildings and to rehabilitate these buildings as quickly as we could, to create a financial engine that would sustain the park, because we would renovate buildings and lease them each year. We take the revenue from the previous year's buildings and renovate more buildings. And so this building rehabilitation engine, if you will, became the financial engine that sustained the place. Now, at the same time, because the buildings are surrounded by landscape, we had to wrap our heads around the landscape. We had to focus on the landscape, even though every year about 90% of our budget went back into buildings. And to do that, because we knew that the Presidio was going to be unlike other national parks, it was going to have a community of ultimately about 10,000 people living and working in the middle of the national park. It meant that we had to really wrestle with the question of having people 24 hours a day in the middle of these relic natural areas and in the middle of this national park. So we really adopted a human-centered restoration mindset. And by that, what I mean is this. Instead of thinking of people as the problem, which is the way we think about people so often when we're talking about native ecosystems, we had to think about people as the solution. They had to be at the core, at the center of any kind of restoration strategy that we were using to restore the Presidio's landscapes and bring them back to health. So we began in part out of desperation, frankly, because we had very limited resources, and the resources we had, we needed to reinvest in buildings to build our financial engine. We adopted a very, very robust community stewardship approach and still to this day, engaged thousands and thousands of individuals each year in the restoration and stewardship, in the care and maintenance of the Presidio National Park site. And what's important about that is not only did it provide us with really critical labor, it also created a much better informed citizenry, because nobody understood the fact that the Presidio was a biodiversity hotspot. Nobody in the community understood, or very few people did, understood the incredible significance of the historic landscapes that we were stewarding. And so by engaging the community directly in the restoration and stewardship, we were building community support for the stewardship and preservation mandate that we had acquired as stewards of a national park site. What we realized really quickly is that to restore the Presidio's landscapes to health, to restore the ecological health of those sites, required us to really engage in pretty transformative restoration, to really change the character of the landscape of the Presidio. The problem is that people loved the Presidio landscape as it was, that the big groves of Tasmanian blue gum that had spread into these fragile riparian systems, that things like assets like Mountain Lake, where generations of children had dumped their goldfish and turtles, all of which had grown into these monsters that had destroyed the native ecosystem, that there was a lot of emotional attachment to these landscapes because people had lived with them and grown up with them over the years. And so we had to work very swiftly on the one hand, but carefully, to build the community's trust so that they would support these kind of transformative things that we needed to do to take derelict sites like this pump station on the side of Mountain Lake, or these many, many, many acres. We have about 150 acres of Tasmanian blue gum forest, a big percentage of which is actually not contributing to the historic landmark. It's actually not historic forest. We had to turn those areas into much more vibrant natural ecosystems, restoring places like Mountain Lake so that we could reintroduce things like the threatened western pond turtle, which is located, of course, one of the youngsters that we reintroduced in the lake. But trying to engage the community as partners in this transformative restoration work that needed to happen, because we knew the community was going to be alarmed about it. We also inherited from the Army. We inherited many things from the Army. They were wonderful stewards of the place in so many ways, but there were a few things that they did that really, really were challenges for us. And one was the amount of contamination on the site. They had created about 13 different landfills all over the site where they disposed of all of the material that they had used that they no longer needed. And many of these were full of contamination. And so we negotiated very early on a transfer of responsibility from the US Army. We took responsibility for the environmental cleanup of the Presidio, and they, in exchange, wrote us a check for about $100 million to fund that work. And what was great about that is that we could drive the schedule and the approach to all of the cleanup, all the remediation projects, which allowed us to not only improve the environmental health of the park, but also to use restoration projects to do things to transform sites that look like this. This is one of the landfills in the Tennessee Hollow watershed, into restored natural sites like this, so that we could not only clean up the environmental contamination, but we could dig down to long buried stream corridors that the Army had put in pipes under those landfills and daylight those streams. Again, trying to expand the footprint of restored natural ecosystem in the middle of the city so that a family could come, or a classroom of kids could come, and they could actually walk the entire watershed from springs and seeps at the top of the watershed all the way down to the salt marshes along the bay, all of which were restored, all of which had been previously buried by the Army. So we were able to, in our first 15 years, to do quite a bit of work in the park. We were able to restore about 3/4 of all the buildings in the park, to build this financial engine. We were able to stop the decline of these relic natural ecosystems and begin the process of expanding those ecosystems, restoring them to health. We were able to restore the decline and actually increase the populations of the park's 22 different special status plant species. But there was one really big challenge that remained, and that was to build an audience for this place. Because the fact is, the Presidio was a military base for generations, for hundreds of years, literally 250, 235 years. And it's a walled enclave. When you walk up to the Presidio, I remember because when I was young, I went to the Presidio as a Boy Scout and went camping there. And you come up to the gate and there are cannons facing you. At the gate, they're decorative, of course, but when you're a kid, you don't really know the difference. And you come up to the gate and there would be a kiosk, and an MP with a rifle would put the rifle, and not at you, but down, handy, and say, "What's your business here today?" So generations up had grown up with this perception that the Presidio was not a welcoming place. And because of that fact, we had our work cut out for us just to build any population. But the fact that that urban national parks, like the Presidio, like the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, were set aside to welcome more diverse urban populations and create a gateway to the broader national park experience, made that we couldn't just make this a national park that served the adjacent neighborhoods, that we need to make the Presidio a national park that felt welcoming to everyone, people from all backgrounds, from all across San Francisco. And that was a really big challenge, just because of some of the reasons that I articulated before. It really was not a welcoming place. It wasn't designed to be a public place. And it wasn't perceived to be a place that belonged to everyone. It was perceived to be, frankly, a neighborhood park for people that lived in the neighborhoods around, which many parks are. But this was a national park. And our mission was to serve everyone, not only across the community, but across the country. So we had a very big challenge. And we also, that challenge was exacerbated by the fact that many of the sites that one normally would expect to focus, where one would normally expect to focus visitor amenities, like the northern waterfront here at Crissy Field, and this was a before photo of what the site looked like before restoration, that many of the most dramatic sites, the sites you would normally expect to have a spectacular park, looked like this. They were utilitarian sites. The whole northern waterfront of the Presidio was covered with 180 acres of pavement, hard-packed dirt, elevated freeway you can see in the distance there, roadways, thousands and thousands of parking spaces, and a whole about 60 non-historic structures. So we had a very big challenge ahead of us, but we had a vision. And in the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, we had an outstanding partner. And in our community, we had an incredible collection of very generous donors. And so we brought those three things together because we wanted to catalyze the transformation of the Presidio's landscape. And we started with the most obvious place, which is the northern waterfront. Again, this is the before. And over a period of time, raised the money, because again, all of our resources were going into the basic restoration of the site. The Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy held a capital campaign, worked with a generous array of community donors, and transformed that site into Crissy Field. And Crissy Field was important for two reasons. The first is it really signaled the fact that the Presidio was going to be a park, because up to that point, most of the work that we had done was really focused on building rehab and leasing to generate revenue to support the park. Excuse me. Thanks. So this signaled a whole new era in the history of the Presidio, a park era in the history of the Presidio. The second thing is it gave us an opportunity to really begin to listen deeply to the community and to begin to really understand what the community needed in order to feel welcome in the Presidio. because Crissy Field opened in 2001. The base closure was in 1994. We had had a number of years to begin to have conversations with the public in the context of the Crissy Field project. And what we consistently heard from the community was this: the Presidio doesn't feel like it's ours. It doesn't feel welcoming. It doesn't have the things we need. It's a place designed really for insiders. And so if you want to make it a place for everyone, you need to create spaces that really respond to our needs and that make that feel welcoming to us. And what we learned, of course, is that everybody has a different sense of what is welcoming and the kinds of landscapes that are welcoming and the kinds of experiences that are welcoming. So we began by listening very deeply, and we heard some very consistent feedback. First, we heard that the public really wanted us to create gateway experience, these quintessential national park experiences, and bring them into the city. So we took a derelict Boy Scout campground, the one that I camped in when I was young, and we turned it into a great national park campground with beautiful stone campfire circles and a stone fireplace, great room like the Awani, and great public bathrooms, so that when you go there, you have the feeling of camping in a great national park campground. But what's amazing, you can take the bus there and take the bus home back to your house. We created a network of 24 miles of trail and 19 miles of bikeway, and a network of 8 scenic overlooks, very much in the tradition, built of stone, these very durable materials, very much in the tradition of great national park overlooks, orienting people to key stories about the history and the ecology of the Presidio. The second thing we heard is the Presidio was really hard to get to. So we, and access became a theme in a variety of ways. So we implemented paid parking in the Presidio and used that to fund a free shuttle. And each year that free shuttle goes between the Presidio and downtown and a host of other transit corridors. And we give rides to over 600,000 people a year. Those are 600,000 people that would be driving to the park, and instead they're able to come here by transit and get to the park for free, reducing our carbon footprint and also reducing the impact on our surrounding neighborhoods. But we also heard about other things about access. People needed to be able to get to the park from some of the more remote neighborhoods in San Francisco on weekends more easily. And so we created a weekend shuttle and partnered with community-based organizations in key neighborhoods to create effectively a transit bridge on weekends to make it easier to get to the park. And we created multilingual experiences so that members of the community for whom English was not their first language could come and they could have a rich and meaningful experience and begin to feel a connection to the Presidio and its history and ecology. One of the other interesting pieces of feedback we got was, well, the Presidio is so serious. It's a former Army base and all the buildings are the same and it's not playful. And so people wanted us to playfully, to make the historic part of the landscape more playful, which when you're dealing with a National Historic Landmark site is pretty challenging. So we worked with a variety of different design firms to develop playful things that are temporary that we could build on the site, like these share chairs, which we scatter on this historic parade ground, which is a very severe place with a backdrop of these very severe big red brick buildings. But the beautiful thing is they're like giant toys that children come and they play on and people sit on and they lounge and look at the view on and they have picnics on. And it's completely humanized this otherwise pretty banal and frankly a little bit alienating landscape. We worked with the community to co-create a whole array of programs and events so that any weekend you come to the Presidio, there's something going on. And instead of being, as park managers, the ones who create the program, we actually just make it easy for the community to come and use the park as a platform for their programming. We also wanted to elevate the history of the past. The Presidio is one of those places that has a really complicated history. Some of those stories are incredibly profound, stories of courage. And some of those stories, frankly, are a little bit difficult. There's some difficult history, like the fact that the internment order for Japanese Americans in the Second World War was issued by the general commanding officer of the Presidio from the Presidio. And as a result, 120,000 Americans were interned up and down the West Coast. So trying to just daylight this history so that people can really understand why this land was preserved and why it's nationally important, why it's significant enough that it has the moniker National Park. We also, frankly, wanted to create some new stories. And so we worked with an array of artists to build place-based artistic interventions in the landscape. And this is one example, one of 4 sculptures by the artist Andy Goldsworthy that we have in the landscape. And this is an old powder magazine. And it's a eucalyptus tree that he squeezed and brought into the space and expanded, and he covered with the adobe mud that the same mud that the Spanish built the original El Presidio garrison with in the 1780s. And lastly, we really prioritized our investment to make it easier for young people and their families who historically have not had access to national parks to get to our national park, so that they could build a connection and they could benefit from access to nature and the outdoors, all the positive health outcomes, the reduction in stress, but also just the thrill of waking up, at a campground in a national park under the stars, especially for a young person who's growing up in the middle of a dense city like San Francisco. So we made a lot of improvements in the park, but we kept hearing the same piece of feedback, even with all of these improvements. And it was really simple. It was this: we love the Presidio, we enjoy the Presidio, but we have no idea where to begin. The thing that is really missing from this park is really the heart of the park, that starting point where everyone begins their experience. And when we dug down to it, what we realized is that the barrier was the elevated freeway. So here's where these 2 stories converge, right? This elevated freeway that was built in the 1930s when the Golden Gate Bridge was built, and the whole corridor of pavement and asphalt and kind of devastation that we know often parallels freeways, that whole corridor of devastation along cut the park in 2. And was really a barrier between the 2 most public parts of the Presidio: the main post, which you see at the top, which is the historic part where the Spanish founded their garrison in 1776. And then the whole northern waterfront, which you see just a bit of here, which is the restored Chrissy Field site that we talked about before. Now, the good news is that as a result of the Loma Prieta earthquake and the conversation that had gone on with the public afterwards, Caltrans had adopted a really exciting approach to rebuilding the freeway. Their first proposal was the same freeway, elevated freeway twice as wide. And the community was not going to happen. We were all in the middle of trying to imagine what the Presidio could be as a national park. And so gradually a consensus emerged both at Caltrans and in the community around the vision of the Presidio Parkway, of not a freeway, but a parkway that is really designed to connect the halves of the park, these 2 most public parts of the park. And luckily for us, included what you see in the very middle of the screen, which is this elevated park over a pair of cut and cover tunnels, so that at that most critical point between the historic main post and Chrissy Field, there would be this 14-acre new piece of land in an area that formerly had been freeway and pavement, that would provide the most spectacular views of the downtown skyline, the Golden Gate Bridge and Bay. Now, the problem was this, that Caltrans is really good at building freeways. That's their job. But they really didn't think it was their responsibility to build the kind of world-class park that we believe this site required, and really demanded because of the drama of the site. We knew what it was going to be like. We'd set up drones and we could see exactly what the site was going to be like. So we decided that we were going to take responsibility. We, the Presidio Trust, working with our 2 partners, we're going to take the responsibility from Caltrans to transform this 14-acre site into the kind of world-class park that we thought the Tunnel Tops deserved to be. Now, to start that process, to make sure that we got the best possible thinking about the potential of the site, and also, frankly, because the site didn't exist, we started the project with the Imagine phase, and it was an invited campaign. I sent letters, competition, excuse me. I sent letters out to about 100 landscape and architecture firms around the world. I got 28 proposals back. And of those proposals, we selected 5 firms, the 5 firms that are listed here. And we began a 3-month competition process that created opportunities for the firms to come together and tour the Presidio, to interact with the public, to interact with the staff. We had meetings regularly every week. And at the end of that 3-month period, we got 5 really different, really interesting schemes for the future of the Tunnel Top site. And what was so great about those schemes is they really envisioned 5 radically different approaches that, to some extent, really talked about the breadth of the landscape profession and all of the different kinds of challenges and the kind of different ideologies, if you will, of the profession of landscape architecture. Really, really different, really exciting, really beautiful public schemes. So we got these 5 schemes. We tested them in a design lab that we built on site, and we staffed with a number of young architecture students and landscape architecture students who were there to explain the schemes to the public and so we used the design lab to gather feedback. And we got about 10,000 members of the public to come to the design lab and give us feedback about the 5 schemes. We also took the 5 schemes out into the community, and we tested the ideas in the 5 neighborhoods that were the least well represented in our visitation, because by that time we had really detailed visitor data based on thousands and thousands of intercept surveys. And so we knew where people were coming from and where they weren't coming from. And again, our fundamental purpose is to make the Presidio a national park for all. So we wanted to make sure that we were serving every neighborhood. So we went out into those communities, we brought the schemes, we asked them to rank them and to give us feedback. And we combined all that feedback. We got really, really, really clear feedback, both about the things they liked about the schemes and also about the things they didn't like about the schemes. And lastly, about things that weren't in the schemes at all, that they really wanted to see more of. They also helped us pick a scheme, which was the scheme developed by Field Operations, probably best known as the designers of the High Line in New York. And then we got to work. So we had a scheme, we had a team, we got to work, but the community input process had been so valuable that we decided to create opportunities throughout the design process for the public to continue to participate in shaping the design. So we did things like, because the community had asked us to add a play environment for kids to the scheme, we created a pop-up nature play environment, and we tested it for 3 summers in the main post. We also created a pop-up environmental education center, and we tested different environmental education strategies all summer with thousands of school kids. We created an international design competition where people from all over the world were invited to submit photographs that captured their park moment. It was My Park Moment was the name of the exhibit. And what was great about it is we used it as a way to gather a lot of intelligence about the kinds of experiences and the kinds of things people value about being in nature and being in the outdoors from all over the world and from all across the United States. It was incredible. We got about 7,000 submissions, and we displayed them on these large panels everywhere in the park. And it created a really interesting conversation about the ways in which the incredible variety of ways in which people value the outdoors and enjoy the outdoors. We had 2 very big barriers that we had to overcome before we could actually build the project. The first was the freeway. We had to get the new freeway rebuilt, and that was a very complicated undertaking because we had to keep the freeway in operation the whole time. So it was a phased construction project. Half came down, half of the new freeway built, half the other half came down. It was a very complicated logistically. But the other thing we needed was funding, because again, as an organization that doesn't get any taxpayer dollars, that doesn't get any funding from the government, we did not have enough earned income to build this ambitious 14-acre new park that we had designed, which we knew was going to cost about $100 million. It was both 14 acres of new park and 4 new buildings. So it's a complicated and pretty ambitious landscape design project. So we turned to our partners, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. They launched a fundraising campaign that we all worked on together to raise $98 million. And then the Presidio Trust was going to put up $20 million of its earned income to fund this project. Now, we knew it would take us a couple of years to do that, and we didn't want to waste that time. And so we used that time to really build and expand a big network of community partnerships, because our pilot programs, where we work with community partners to bring community-driven programming into the park, this Park as Platform idea, had really, really been very successful. And so we wanted to build a network of hundreds of community partners to activate the Presidio and activate the Tunnel Top site when it was completed, with programming every weekend throughout the year. We worked with those community partners to curate, to really co-curate an opening season where there was something going on every day, large festivals and monthly co-curated events and community gatherings, as well as a whole array of self-guided experiences that were all designed to really create ways for people from many different backgrounds to connect to their national park site. We also created two other things that were really, really important. First, we created a fellowship-based activator council, the leaders of 13 different community-based organizations from all across San Francisco that came and advised us on every aspect of the tunnel tops and helped us create at least one large cultural program in the opening season. And here on the right, you see Fabiana Rodriguez, one of our first artists in a place-based art program, and some of her work behind, which ended up covering some of the sidewalks for the opening season. Really beautiful, bright, vibrant, playful graphics that interpreted the ecological history of the Presidio. We also created a soft opening period where many of our community partners could come and they could actually test the site for us in advance of opening. So we could pilot all of our operational strategies to make sure the site was going to work operationally really smoothly. So it opened on July 17th, 2022, so almost 2 years ago. This is opening day, a beautiful day in the park. The park that opened had essentially three key zones. The first focused on creating a new visitor gateway, that where do I start experience. And it includes all the things we had heard from the public that they needed to enjoy this place. The transit system, our transit center, the free shuttle, the free around the park shuttle, as well as rentable e-bikes that anyone could come and borrow to travel all around the park. It included both a new visitor center, newly retooled visitor center, and directional signage that allowed you to curate your own experience of the park and get wherever you wanted to from that point. I created a new gateway pavilion. The picnic pavilion was built so that anyone could come and enjoy a summer day, even when it's unbelievably cold and foggy, as it is so often in San Francisco in June and July and August. Those of you who've been here in the summer, you know what I'm talking about. But a place that people could come and enjoy the view and get out of the wind. Again, a direct outgrowth of community. We built a campfire circle, one of the only national park campfire circle in San Francisco, where we could deliver an authentic national park campfire experience, complete with a ranger every afternoon. So people could come and have one of those like classic national park experiences in the middle of their community. And we designed gardens that surrounded all of the Gateway Plaza that really built on the long horticultural tradition of the Presidio. The Presidio is unique in that it had a very strong landscape tradition, a tradition of beautiful horticultural gardens going all the way back to the Civil War. And so we wanted to celebrate that with a contemporary interpretation of what is state of the art in horticulture. And so this portion of the gardens really focused a lot on Southern Hemisphere drought tolerant, climate adapted species. You see here, leucospermum, lamandra, and a number of things. Here's just a close up of one of these amazing leucospermum, which we're having a super bloom this year on the tunnel top. The second element or phase of the kind of element of the project is really this community commons, the grassy panels over the top of the tunnels themselves, and that were designed to really take advantage of these incredible views. And they were really conceived of as a community place, a place where community could just come together and have a beautiful day in their national park, surrounded by the spectacular views. So here are people just hanging out, having picnics, flying kites. Of course, it's always windy, so there's plenty of wind to fly your kites. We also actively programmed it, working with our community partners to create a civic space where community can come together, and we have dance performances and hip hop concerts and all kinds of really vibrant activity every weekend in the summer. There again, a different kind of set of gardens, these braided lawns surrounded by these braided mounds of landscape that create a sense of enclosure. What the community said is, we don't want too much lawn. What we really want are beautiful gardens. And Jim Corner, the designer, said, his basic theory of the design was that people will come for the views and stay for the gardens, which I thought was just such a beautiful idea. And the central area along the commons is the place where the landscape begins to transition from horticultural to native, because as I mentioned, the Presidio is a biodiversity hotspot, and we are very committed to expanding the footprint of natural area in the park. And so one of the things we experiment a lot with is using native species in a horticultural application. And so this is a glimpse. I'm sorry, this is so blurry. I'm not sure why that is, but a glimpse of one of those gardens in this central zone, one of these transition gardens in this central zone that mix native and non-native climate adapted species together. And of course, places for people to eat. Out at the northern edge, a new cliff walk that is designed fully accessible like the whole site, but really designed to allow people to enjoy the incredible views of the bridge and bay. These incredible benches that, again, built of wood milled from our historic forest, from dead trees, but designed to bring both something functional but also playful into the landscape of the Presidio. Luckily, this was all new land, so we could be a bit more playful than some of the other parts of the park where there's a lot of historic integrity that we have to make. And you can see this young person doesn't really believe it's a bench. They think it's and then lastly, along the cliff walk, a whole array of interpretation that's designed to really help people understand the deep history, the historic significance of the site. And again, the reason why these lands were preserved as national park and not developed just as another part of San Francisco. And here's just another glimpse of that. Along the very northern edge of the cliff walk, you see the transition into an almost entirely native landscape. Big exception you'll see are the trees, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the idea of the embankment is there's about a 35-foot drop from the land over the top of the tunnels down to Crissy Field. And so it's a transitional landscape that mimics the kind of bluff that would have existed historically along the northern edge of the main post. And so we wanted to create the kind of landscape feeling using primarily native and a handful of non-native species to recreate the feeling that this bluff would have had pre-contact, pre-European settlement. And then the last element of the project is the youth campus. One of the really important pieces of feedback that we heard from the public during the design process was how important it was that we create new ways for urban kids to connect to nature in the outdoors. We worked with a whole host of healthcare providers and pediatricians, learned about the challenges young people face growing up in San Francisco, and wanted to build an environment that was scaled so that every child in San Francisco could come and begin to build a relationship with their national park site, but also really connect to nature. Because one of the core things that we're trying to do in our national park is to make sure that every young person in our community grows up feeling a sense of connection to nature and also a sense of passion about nature so that they become stewards. Because we all know if we want nature to survive the 21st century, we want all of the threatened plants and animals to survive the extinction crisis that we're in the middle of, that we need that next generation of stewards. So we wanted to build something that was fun and engaging, that created the kinds of experiences that young people have in more remote environments, but something that could also tolerate literally hundreds of thousands of kids a year coming and using the site. So the first element of the youth campus is something called the Outpost. It's a nature play environment that all of the features are built of natural materials of wood and water and sand and rock. There's no plastic. There's no colored plastic. There's no, big steel features. But the core idea is that each of these features is actually designed based on an element of the Presidio's history and ecology, but informed by developmental psychology and the evolution of young people and the kinds of experiences that they need to have to grow both emotionally and physically in the environment. And these are just a couple of glimpses. These earlier features here are really designed for younger kids and provide some sort of transformative experiences that young people need to have. And as you move to the west, the challenges become greater, they become more difficult, and they're designed for older kids. But the great thing is this, that every single feature is something a child can take at their own speed. The whole place is fully accessible. Each of these features offers an experience for a young person that's in a wheelchair, has limited mobility, so that we make sure no child is left behind and that every child in our community can connect. And the Outpost has its own set of gardens, which are primarily planted with the native dune species that would have existed along the northern edge of the Presidio back in the day. Because all of our native plants are grown in our own native plant nursery on site using Presidio propagules, our native plants are literally about this tall when they get outplanted. And we knew that we wanted to have some verticality. And so we planted an array of drought-tolerant, climate-adapted non-native trees that we could get in the nursery. And over time, as the natives grow, we'll remove those non-native trees and allow the natives to really dominate the landscape. But we also used the landscape as a way to really connect the young people to plants, both to native plants like the California poppy and the dune tansy, which you see here, but also to help them communicate to their friends, to their colleagues, how one should behave in the presence of native species, beginning to build that kind of stewardship mindset. The second element of the youth campus is the field station, which is a drop-in environmental education space. If the outpost is all about large motor skills, gross motor skills, the field station is all about fine motor skills and connecting with nature through your senses. And the field station has an endless array of changing experiences. It's one of the few places I've ever been to where you can actually get up close and personal to a coyote. Not a living coyote. Unfortunately, this coyote was hit by a car. But there's something magical about being able to see these beautiful wild creatures up close and personal. And that's the kind of experience the field station offers. Lastly, we expanded the Chrissy Field Center Youth Campus facilities. These are facilities that are focused on deep exposure, environmental education programs, and internships. And the wonderful thing is that the young people, the high school age students that go through the internship programs in the Chrissy Field Center, which are primarily focused on young people in Title I schools, which primarily serve low-income kids. Those kids, we hire those young people back when they graduate from high school to be park guides and adventure guides in the field station and the outpost, so that we're creating job opportunities for these young people to move into environmental professions. Last but not least, we built into the project a whole array of strategies to generate revenue, because we knew that adding 14 acres of new park to the Presidio, like this, very heavily used. We forecast our first year we'd get 2 million visitors, which in fact we did, just to the tunnel tops, that we needed to generate some new kinds of revenue to be able to sustain the place. So we, enhanced the retail opportunities in the visitor center, and we created rentable spaces for weddings and corporate events and all those kinds of things, woven into the landscape in a kind of imperceptible way. So in short, the Tunnel Tops project is really the culmination of a 2-decade effort to transform the northern waterfront of the Presidio that really started in 2001 with the opening of Chrissy Field, which you see at the bottom. But the net result of all of that is that we've taken about 180 acres of asphalt and transformed it into this green heart for the park. And not only that, we succeeded in the course of making that park in really transforming the Presidio into a park for all. Because every year we do really detailed visitation studies to understand who's coming to the park. In 2008, when we did our first study, the visitation patterns in the Presidio did not come anywhere close to reflecting the diversity of San Francisco or the Bay Area. And our latest comprehensive survey, which was done in Crete, showed that the visitation of the Presidio now comes within a couple of percentage points of reflecting the ethnic, income, and age diversity of the Bay Area, which is something that we're really, really delighted by. So with that, I'd like to stop, and I thank you for your kind attention tonight.
Thank you so much. We do have a few questions.
Great.
And so before we move into the question and answer period, I just want to remind people that if you stick around for a few more minutes after we are finished with the questions, we will have a chance for us to give out our door prize tonight, which is a copy of the book, which is Planting in a Post-Wild World, Designing Plant Communities for Resilient Landscapes by Thomas Rainier, which I think probably addresses a lot of the same questions that you guys worked with on your project, although I'm just so impressed by the amount of community collaboration that you guys were able to do. I mean, I can't imagine there weren't issues at some point. But so the Presidio Trust is still kind of running things, or will it hand off to another entity now that the Tunnel Tops is done, or is it just going to continue running the show?
Yeah, no, the Tunnel Tops is we are the permanent stewards of the Presidio. When Congress created us, they gave us jurisdiction over 80% of the site. So we're here to stay and continue to be good stewards of the park, and frankly, continue the transformation. We're not done. There's still really important work to be done in the park.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I think you've done a great job. We do have a couple questions in the comments section. First is Carol asks, how deep is the soil on top of the freeway, and where did all that soil come from?
Yeah, such a good question. And this was, let me just back up and say that one of the big challenges that we had to really wrestle with is Caltrans designed the freeway knowing there would be a park over the top of it, but they did the structural analysis calculations and set the loading before we had a design. And so we had to do a design that fit within their assumptions about what kind of landscape it would accommodate, which, as you saw in that first drawing, was almost all lawn. And we knew we wanted something much richer. So we had to get really creative about the soil. The good news is the minimum soil depth in most parts of the site is 4 feet, and which is great. A lot of times, on roof terraces, people are faced with much less soil than that. There are areas like where the tunnels curve down, and that the soil gets to be 10, 12, 14 feet deep. And those are the areas, for example, we planted larger shrubs. So if you mapped where the tunnels are and how the design lays on it, you would see a pattern that has to do with where the soil is deepest. The soil came from all over because we're a national park site. I'm seeing these great questions popping up. Should close the chat. Keep them coming. They're great. The soil, because we're a national park site, we're always looking for soil that as closely as possible matches the native soil. And that site would have been all sandy. And luckily we were able to access an enormous amount of sand from a large apartment building complex that was being built in an area of San Francisco that had very incredibly deep sand deposits, and they were very clean. And so we were able to get, in the end, we had about 90,000 cubic yards of soil that we had to import. And we were so fortunate to have really good sand, because as you know, good soil is hard to find, right? And it was critical building it over a freeway. I saw another question about drainage.
Yes. How do you accommodate drainage on top of the freeway?
Yeah, really good question. That was something Caltrans designed into the system, and then we built into their system. There's a system. First of all, we used really well draining soil. It's predominantly sand. The water moves through it very quickly. There's a network of subdrains under the entire landscape that pulls the water off the site quickly and then sends it under the tunnels out to the bay and into the storm drainage system. So it is, as my project manager said, almost all the money in this project is in the ground. It's not the plants. So.
Has anybody done any studies before and after, now that you've reduced all that hardscape to natural soil conditioning? Has it had any positive effect on the health of the bay?
Yeah, interesting question. We know that because it's not only, not only did we remove all that asphalt, we did a lot of marsh restoration, and we've also built a lot of bioswales to redirect the stormwater from the remaining parking lots first into that. We know that the water testing we do within our ecosystems, the quality of the water has improved. We don't do testing in the bay because, we're a speck in the eye of the bay. I mean, the amount of water flowing off of us. But we know in the park, water quality has improved really dramatically as a result of all of the kind of improvement in pervious, in surface, reduction in impervious surface, say it the other way. Yeah, great question. Thanks.
And Carol asks, what role did the local native tribes have in developing the project?
Yeah, great. Such a great question. So San Francisco is a very unusual place. Up until not too long ago, it was believed that there were no remaining Ramaytush Ohlone people. And then the Park Service did a study, a genealogical study, and they determined that there actually were a number of descendants. And so we partnered with the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, which is an organ, because they're an unrecognized tribe, federally unrecognized tribe. So We work with the ARO on a host of different projects on cultural programming. We're working with them on some other important sites around the Tunnel Top site right now. There are some former village sites and things like that located in the Presidio. Part of why it's preserved as a landmark is that Ohlone history. But we were just getting to know them when the planning for this project was going on. And so we got them involved the minute we built a relationship with them, and they were involved, for example, in the storytelling and the interpretation. And if you go there, you'll see there's an element of Ohlone history in all of the wayside panels that are located there. So, and now we work with them really closely on all of our work.
Fantastic. Another question from Diana. What was it about the field operations design proposals that people liked the most and encouraged you to choose them?
Yeah, it was really interesting to me because it was by far the simplest scheme. And it was the most realistic. In fact, of the four, it was the one that fit most comfortably in our budget. So it was the simplest and it was the most affordable. And it felt like it was the right thing for the site. I mean, that's what we kept saying. It was like people looked at the images and they're like, yeah, that feels right. That feels like the Presidio, and that's what we hear all the time. People have a very strong attachment to the character of the place and they want us to enhance it, not destroy it.
Yeah, it's certainly been anybody who grew up or lived in the Bay Area, that was a big part of it, was the Presidio. Yeah, when I was there, you still had the checkpoints also.
It was crazy, wasn't it, when you were young? No.
And everything it's a national park, so the whole thing is free now.
Yep, open and free. You don't charge
Fantastic.
admission. In fact, legally, by our legislation prohibits us from charging admission. So
Awesome.
that's why we charge a lot for people to live in the park, because that's how we support the park and keep it free for everyone.
Do you get any help from the large corporations that are leasing space in the park?
Well, they help us by paying rent, which is really great.
Karina writes, I'm an arborist. Besides the ukes you mentioned, what are the species of the largest, grandest trees I should check out when we come visit?
Wow. Okay, well, so we have quite a few different trees. I don't know that they're the largest or grandest trees you'll find, because this site had almost no trees on it historically, right? The trees were planted, the blue gum, Monterey cypress, and Monterey pine were the three primary species that were planted in the forest in the 1880s. The whole forest was planted in the 1880s. And unfortunately, it means it's all dying at the same time. But we have some really beautiful Monterey cypress trees in the park, really dramatic. Of course, a huge array of beautiful blue gums, really some really dramatic kind of blue gum monocultures arching over the roadways that are incredible. But then we have these really unusual, we have the biggest Hymenophorum flavum trees I've ever seen. And that's because the commanding officers had a relationship with Kate Sessions in the Balboa Park Nursery very early on. And they bought all their plants from Balboa Park to beautify the park. And so there are all these really like unusual callistemons and really fascinating kind of things just scattered around in the landscape. And I had never seen Hymenophorum before, and it's like, wow, this is like, it's like a eucalyptus tree. It's crazy. So,
well, it sounds like you have at least one tree tourist.
yeah, yeah. Come on up.
Tamara asks, what is the geology of the area?
Yeah, so interesting. So the Presidio, like all of San Francisco, about half of the Presidio is covered with a deep layer of sand. Sand blew in from the coast, and all along the northern edge, there are deep sand deposits. And the whole northern part of the Presidio was originally a big braided marsh set of tidal marshes and back dune fens and sand dunes that went all the way over through the Marina District. So that's all sandy. But then there are all these Franciscan formation areas in the center of the park, and there also are these spines of serpentine. And one of the reasons there's so many rare and endangered plants in the park is there are all these former serpentine grasslands. And so, the Raven's manzanita, the Franciscan manzanita, the only remaining species, specimens in the wild are in the Presidio clarkia. They're all adapted to, they're serpentine endemics. And so that's part of the reason that we have such really interesting biodiversity. Plus, then we have other endangered species that are adapted to the dunes. Almost all the dunes were destroyed because of the development of the city. And so that's why we have such a high population of special status plant species in the park, the dunes and the serpentine.
Yeah, a follow-up question from Diana is, have you done any biodiversity studies in the park since you completed the project? And did you find any surprising species visiting the site? So, I think that was yes.
So we do, yeah, great question. We do, every other year, we do comprehensive biodiversity studies of the Presidio. And so we're just getting ready to look at this site because we did one before, right before construction. So we'd see what is going on there. What is true is that all across the Presidio, just to go off the tunnel tops for a minute, all across the Presidio, we have this regular experience where we will say remove a parking lot, or like that one picture I showed of that derelict pump station on the edge of Mountain Lake. When we removed that and we regraded the site to a more natural grade, we had about 5 different species that haven't been seen in the Presidio for, for 100 years or more. The seed bank, they were still in the seed bank and they just popped up in the park. And we've had that experience over and over again, where by uncovering this native soil, that the seeds are still in the seed bank and plants are just pop up that haven't been seen for quite a while. We've also been reintroducing both plant and animal species like the western pond turtle. We've introduced a number of butterfly species, and we're working on actually a plan to reintroduce the California quail, because we've now done enough habitat restoration that we believe we have enough habitat to support a sustainable population of our state bird, which would be great.
That'd be wonderful to hear those little buggers.
Yeah, I know. They're so cute running around the park.
And I had a question of who keeps up the gardens, and will the native nursery continue?
Yeah, so we have so much more restoration work to do. And we never plant natives in the park that we didn't grow ourselves. So because we want to protect the genetic integrity of the native plants that remain in the park. So the native plant nursery will be there for decades to come, because what we're trying to do is gradually replant the forest in a way that allows for a more biodiverse understory. Even though the overstory is mostly non-native trees, so many of the natives that are plants are native to the Presidio grow in the understory of a native Monterey pine forest down in the Monterey Peninsula. And so we're able to create more structural diversity if we plant the forest the right way. So there's an endless need for natives. So we'll continue to do that. We maintain the landscape with a mix of in-house and out-of-house staff. The in-house staff tend to be horticulturalists that are doing the more specialized kind of planting and pruning and care. And then we outsource things like mowing and pavement management and things like that to private contractors. It's just more efficient for us to do it that way.
Great. Well, we need more horticulturists. So
the world needs more horticulturists.
Yes, let's keep them employed. And I just think it's wonderful that the community and of course all the children, I'm sure the school system, the school district is using the whole park very well. Great.
And we have now we're up to 9 schools, well, 8 schools, and we're about to build our 9th. There'll be 9 schools in the Presidio because people want to live there and raise their families there, but they also want to go send their kids to school there because it's such a safe place and you can grow up in a national park.
Well, and congratulations on your impending retirement. You'll be able to just enjoy it.
Yes, indeed. Well, after being in the park for 34 years, it's time to make space for that next generation of park makers. So, yes, Carol.
One last question. Yeah.
Thought. Yeah. Do you want to read it? Yeah.
Sure. Carol asks, are you keeping records on the various plantings?
Yes, we are. We do photo monitoring. Okay. And we also, we keep detailed records of all the things that we plant. We pull the designs into our GIS and AutoCAD database that we have for the whole park. And one of the interesting things that we're measuring and monitoring is how the natives spread on the tunnel tops over time. Because you think about most gardens, we don't really design gardens for plants to plant themselves. And so trying to figure out how we make decisions about what to keep and what to weed out, where we want natives to spread and where we don't, and things like that. It's a really interesting kind of question that I think is at the heart of ecological horticulture and the kind of challenges that we're wrestling with today in gardens and in horticulture more generally.
Well, yeah, and you're kind of starting over from scratch a little bit, so it'll be interesting for other projects to see what you guys are coming up with also. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. Again, it's a very inspiring project. Thank you all for attending, and we will hopefully see you next time. Thank you very much.